Coaching can help you get quicker to your desired destination. It can create insights and even be transformational. However, it depends on the coach's expertise. With a bad coach, you will be throwing money out the window and wasting your time. Dr. John Reed has written 2 books called Pinpointing Excellence to help you, as a consumer of coaching, to choose a capable executive coach and select a coach that has the competencies to have you reach your desired outcome. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Birus, and today we have Dr. John Reed. John, welcome.
Thank you, Katrina. So nice of you to have me on. Delighted to be here.
So you're really a proponent for higher standards for executive coaches. So tell us a little bit, what brought you to that point to really sort of look at a deeper level to make sure that executive coaches have the standards?
That's a great question, Katrina. Well, I was right out of business school. I was an executive for about 11 years and then went back to school to get trained as an organizational psychologist and coach. And then I started to work as a coach. And it was at that time that I began to see that there were a lot of people calling themselves executive coaches who had little to no actual qualifications for doing that because there were no entry requirements to get into the field, right? Anybody could call themselves a coach, and actually that's still true.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. My hairdresser says she's a coach, and she's a great hairdresser, but from one day to the other, she was a coach. So absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and so for a while, I was kind of confused about that, but then I began to realize that not everybody who was entering the field had a background in business and psychology and actually coaching training. I also noticed that people weren't trained in ethics, so they weren't necessarily as ethical as they could be in delivering the service. So that I began to, let me put it this way, that was a helpful thing for me in the marketplace because on those bases I could distinguish myself. So that was helpful. On the other hand, there were a lot of people I would hear about who were very disillusioned and upset, were ticked off about having spent quite a lot of money to get mediocre to poor service. So I tried to do 2 things. I tried to be the best qualified and best performing executive coach I could possibly be. But I also decided to start taking steps to educate buyers of coaching, consumers of executive coaching, so that they could be as well protected in their decision making and avoid investing in coaches who didn't have all the training that they were supposed to have.
Now, John, before we go there, because you got a lot to say on that subject, I want to, since you mentioned that coaching, business, and psychology and ethics were something that you went, to really study it, to be a better coach, and I commend you for it. Tell us a little bit, not only the branding aspect of how to distinguish yourself from other coaches that don't have any training, for example, but what did it bring to the table when you were coaching leaders?
Oh, gee. Well, I coach primarily, as you do, Katrina, senior executives or heads of law firms and those kinds of things. And those people expect in a coach somebody who understands business, the way organizations run, organizational strategy, what's going on in the marketplace, all those basic business knowledge areas are critical to have credibility with leaders at that level. So that's the first thing that they, at least in my experience, that they will look at. I have an MBA from Dartmouth, which is a top 15 school. I was lucky to have that. That's one of the first things that they want to check out is, what does this person know about executive life at this level? And then I would say the next thing that they look for is actual training in coaching, right? So you and I are both, for example, master certified coaches with the International Coach Federation, right?
Yes, but then you say, oh, we also need psychology. In the ICF, the International Coaching Federation says, oh, no, we are different from psychologists. We're coaches. We do the present. We don't look at the past, for example. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think the ICF provides a good fundamental training for coaching, all kinds of coaching, executive coaching, life coaching, career coaching, all kinds of different types of coaching. It's a good general set of competencies. However, it doesn't require any competency in business.
That's true.
Or in psychology.
Absolutely.
Right?
On the contrary, I would say they try to distinguish themselves from psychologists.
I think you're right. And you'll be interested, I think you probably know this, but now more than 2/3 of the 40,000 or so people who are certified as coaches by the ICF, more than 2/3 of them now claim that their primary focus in coaching is organizations, businesses, executives. So even the ICF has come up with a subgroup, a community of sort of organizational coaches. So they realize that they have to be stronger in that area specifically. So, and in answer to your question, you could make the same case about psychology. Psychology is a way of understanding behavior change, how people can experience resistance to having to change their behaviors, how they can be defensive. It's also helpful as a psychologist to be able to identify anxiety or depression or other underlying factors that might be going on with highly stressed executives. So there are a whole host of things that are helpful in psychology to be more effective in working with very intelligent, very stressed individuals, and that's who you typically see at the top of organizations. And then in terms of ethics, I think you and I both appreciate that this is an intangible service, right? People can come to us for support, and they, to some degree, they would have no idea if we were operating unethically, because sometimes that happens in a way that's hard to track. So I could be misrepresenting myself, for example, right?
Right.
So it's important to operate and be able to say to somebody, I am adhering to a standardized ethics code that you can pull up and read. And in the case of psychology, if you are a licensed psychologist, I am, or if you're, for example, in Europe, and there you're called a chartered psychologist, you have to operate under an ethics code from the psychological, in the case of the U.S., the American Psychological Association. And you also probably have to have continuing education to maintain your psychology license. So
as the ICF too, you have to have continuing education.
You absolutely do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see these four areas, business, psychology, coaching, and ethics, as just fundamental for high quality service as an executive coach. So the idea then was to help people who are investing in executive coaching know the right questions to ask, and also have a process to use when they are considering different coaches to ensure that the coaches actually have the competencies that they need.
Yes, and you've even written 2 books, Pinpointing Excellence, Succeed with Great Executive Coaching, and Steer Clear of the Rest. So you're really a proponent of excellence when it comes to executive coaching. Tell us a little bit about your books and the key messages.
Oh, well, thank you, Katrina. Again, going back to my observing, let's put it this way, a highly variable set of quality in the service being provided by people who are saying they're executive coaches, I finally arrived at the idea that it would be important to write a book that went into detail and offered, for example, 50 different questions that you could use in interviewing executive coaches to get at their qualifications, and also to provide them with a process and actually an evaluation system for getting at those qualifications, and also to kind of explain why this is still an unregulated industry. There is nothing akin to the American Medical Association, as in medicine, or the American Bar Association, as in the law.
That's right.
Lots and lots of other professions. So, in fact, I personally think it has a long way to go before it is really, truly a full-fledged profession for exactly that reason. There are no minimum standards that people have to meet.
So the ICF will say, yes, we have standards. We have ACCs, which is the new coach. Then we have PCC, which is the professional coach, and the MCC, which you are.
Yes.
And so am I, that we have extensive experience. So they do have qualifications. Where do you think that ICF misses the point?
I'm a fan of ICF, and I know the head of the ICF and see her just a few months ago, had a very nice get together with her at a conference. I think if you want to talk about preparing people for executive coaching, not just general purpose coaching, then you need to, in addition to the general coaching training that the ICF does a fine job of providing around the 8 competencies that you and I know so well, you also need to have somebody who is well trained in business and well experienced in business. And you also need to have somebody who is well trained in psychology, particularly related to providing psychological assessments and interpreting them, to helping people, as I said earlier, navigate behavioral change challenges, things like that. And again, we've talked about that. So I think if I were grading the ICF in the plus column, I would say good general purpose coach training. And also they provide an ethics code. So they provide, if you're a master certified coach, as you and I are, and we represent 4% roughly of the 40,000 coaches, probably more than that now, of the ICF.
Wow,
right?
Only 4%.
Only 4%. So literally 1 out of every 20 ICF coaches is an MCC, which is fine for those two criteria areas. But you need to be able, in my opinion, to also demonstrate a lot of depth in business.
I agree.
And a lot of depth in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not required to become even an MCC.
I guess because some MCCs are life coaches and not executive coaches. I'm not sure all MCCs are business coaches. But tell us a little bit about you described top executive coach for Tech 4 evaluation system. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It is described in detail in both books. The first book came out in 2011, and the second book, which is an expansion on the first, came out in 2022.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you. You were always encouraging, and that was very helpful. And you're a very, very well thought of author.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. But I really appreciate, because you go into depth of what makes a good executive coach. And not only that, you really help the consumer evaluate how they need to select and look.
Right.
So sorry, I interrupted you. Tell us about the Tech 4 evaluation system.
So the Tech 4 it's simply an evaluation system in which you can grade a coach on a scale of 0 to 100, just like you would get a grade in school, 25 points each of those 4 areas: business, psychology, coaching, and ethics. And it gives you a very, very clear set of criteria and several things to look at in order to assign a value, a grade for each of those 4 areas. So a perfect executive coach would get nobody is that, but would get a score of 100, right?
Right.
The other thing that it's helpful for is if you are interested in entering and becoming an executive coach, it can guide how you decide to train and educate yourself so that you really become very strong in the field. So, for example, let's say I'm a clinical psychologist, right? And I decided that I want to become a great executive coach, right? Well, as a clinical psychologist, I'm already working under the APA ethics code, and I'm already very well trained in psychology. So I have 2 of the 4 criteria areas covered. But I probably then would need to go back and get an MBA, right?
Yes.
And I also probably would need to become ICF certified, so I have good grounding in general coaching. That would put me in a relatively strong position in the marketplace. And given the fact that consumers who've been hearing about the Tech 4, Katrina, for 10 years now, it's become reasonably popular. So more and more consumers are using it to essentially verify that a coach is strong in those 4 areas. So if you are not strong in those four areas, you are likely not going to get selected.
Yes, and this is very helpful.
So it's raising the bar. It's raising the bar,
right?
I hope.
No, it's raising the bar, and it's very helpful for new coaches that can evaluate where their strengths are and where they need to further develop. So, and you have this in your book, Pinpointing Excellence. So I encourage the listeners to go and purchase it. I think it's probably anybody that is a coach that needs to read it, for sure.
We've been very lucky. It has turned out to be helpful for both consumers and also coaches who, want to be continuously improving, continuously developing. It can give them some areas to begin to get strengthened in so that, again, their level of competitiveness, their level of attractiveness in the marketplace continues to improve.
So I want to ask you just one more question on that. Coaching and psychology. Now, the ICF does try to separate that very thoroughly. I hear your argument, and I totally agree with you that it's complementary in a lot of ways. What would you say to ICF person that thinks it should be totally separated?
Well, I think the ICF, there are forms of psychology that are clinically oriented, right? So clinical psychology, counseling psychology, areas of psychology like that, which indeed do kind of help someone look retrospectively at how some events in their childhood may be affecting their behavior now, what kind of family system influences they experienced, there are a couple of areas of psychology that focus that way. The area that I think is of psychology that is particularly relevant for executive coaching is the area of industrial and organizational psychology, which is another branch of psychology. And that talks more about the behavior change process, the natural resistance to behavior change, which you can readily experience if you work with senior executives. They know they need to change. You have clients like this, I know, Katrina, and they want to be able to change, but it's not easy. So understanding the processes and how to help people move through that is one of the things, particularly executives, is one of the things that you have in organizational psychology training. You also have training in how organizations themselves can be structured or changed to be more adaptive in their own marketplaces. So there's that element as well. So the ICF position, I think, in some ways has merit because there are some forms of psychology that really aren't as relevant to executive coaching. But what I advocate is that the psychology training that people elect is specifically aimed at working in businesses and with executives. And really, there are two divisions of the APA where that is absolutely significant. One is Division 13 of the APA, which is consulting psychology. The other is Division 14 of the APA, which is essentially industrial organizational psychology. And those two divisions focus very significantly now on executive coaching.
Wonderful, Lee. That's great. I know we're coming to the end of the podcast, but I do have one more question for you.
Sure.
That I'm sure our listeners might be thinking. Some clients want a person that is a CEO of a company or has had experience as CEO of a company to be a coach. What's your idea and opinion about that? So you need to be a CEO to coach a CEO. Do you agree, disagree?
I think a little bit simplistic, because just because you were a CEO, if I said I was a CEO and therefore I'm qualified to coach CEOs, I could be a CEO and not know anything about actually working with people to develop new skills.
Yes, I certainly know that with billion jerks.
Yeah, exactly. I could be a CEO who actually, under the covers, might not have been all that successful, right? I could actually have a number of gaps, and I might not know a hell of a lot about the fundamentals of coaching, right? I might be relatively directive. There are a whole bunch of gap areas that are not necessarily addressed just by someone saying that they've had experience as a CEO. Most of my clients are at that level. I have an enormous amount of respect for people, but there's a lot of variability at that level in terms of background that lends itself to being an excellent executive coach. Certainly, it's helpful to have had experience and to be able to empathize and understand where your client is and maybe what the challenges are that they're facing every day. So from that point of view, I think having had experience as a CEO is certainly a good thing. But beyond that, how do I know that a CEO has very strong training in coaching or psychology, and how do I know that they're operating under an ethics code?
Right. So
I really don't.
You have given a good answer to that question. We're really coming to the end of our podcast. So where can people get a hold of you?
Oh, well, the corporate website is Quinn Reed Associates, QUINNREED Associates.com. But for the books in this particular topic, they could go to Pinpointing Excellence, all one word, .com, pinpointingexcellence.com. And there's a whole host of information that is there. And they're also in the book, there's a free giveaway set of information about how to determine whether executive coaching is something that's right for you right at this particular point in your life. It may be the right time for coaching, actually, but it may not be. And so clarifying whether you really need it is very important. And so I'm trying to provide that information as well.
Thank you very much, John. So useful. I commend every executive coach to read the book. So thank you very much, John.
Thanks so much, Katrina, for having me. Great talking with you.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burris's CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.